New York's classic rock, Q1043.
And I welcome to our show AJ Tesler, who is the dad of two. He is a filmmaker, and I wanted to tell you about something very close to his heart, which will touch your heart. You wouldn't have a heart if this didn't touch your heart. It's his new documentary, Magnolia's Hope, which you can now stream, and it's really the story of his family and their first child, Maggie, Magnolia, who seemed perfectly fine and healthy until suddenly she wasn't. And it turned out that she has a very rare neurological illness, which has completely changed your lives. And so this documentary is really looking at the first 8 years of Maggie's life and your life with her. And first of all, how is she and how old is she now?
Maggie's 10 right now. She's doing really well. She still has Rett syndrome, and we fight every day to do everything we can to make sure that that won't always be true.
Explain what Rett syndrome is, because most people have never even heard of it. It's so rare.
Sure. So Rett syndrome is a rare neurological disorder. It affects mostly girls and sometimes boys, where they start out developing normally, and then sometime by the time they turn 2, they start to lose the skills that they've learned. So most of the kids with Rett syndrome will lose the ability to use their hands to talk. Many of them never learn to walk or might lose the ability to walk. They'll have seizures and debilitating anxiety, their GI issues, heart problems, and a whole list of other maladies. And in 2007, in the lab, they were able to prove that it was actually reversible. So it's not degenerative, it's progressive disorder, which means that if we're able to translate some of this science into human clinical trials, my daughter would no longer have Rett syndrome, which is a pretty incredible thing to say. And we are inching ever closer to making that a reality.
Well, how is she now? It would seem that she would be one of those most at risk for COVID. And
Yeah.
how scary is that?
Yeah, so she does have a compromised immune system as a result of all of this. We have done everything we can to keep her as safe as humanly possible. And in so doing, we bought an RV and have been keeping miles away from as many people as we possibly can, so that we can make sure that the risk is as small as is possible, because the danger is significant.
This story follows you through one of these clinical trials. You were lucky enough to have your daughter participate in this trial, but with these trials, you don't know if your child is getting the placebo or is getting the treatment, and you take us through this heart-wrenching process.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that one of the important things about clinical trials is just making sure that they happen. And so for us, we knew that Maggie needed to be a part of this. It's something she wanted to be a part of, because it's something that could help move the science along to get us ever more closer to that cure and to that mountaintop that we're all trying to get to. So regardless of what the outcome was, and I hope people will watch the movie and get the experience of what it felt like to go through something like that, it was important to be a part of, and it was important to learn everything that we can. And that clinical trial, that medicine continues into clinical trials, into additional phases, and is still something that might be available for Maggie in short order.
It has to be so frustrating when somebody has a rare disease. The fundraising apparatus isn't in place, for example, as opposed to breast cancer.
Right.
And so it's hard to raise the funds in order to give Maggie and others who have Rett syndrome the best chance at reversing.
Yeah, one of the things that we found about fundraising is that it's really hard for people to get invested into a cause that hasn't personally impacted them. And so what we hope with this movie which people can watch at magnoliashopedoc.com. What we hope is that people will see it and feel some kinship and connection to our family and our daughter, because it's not just our story, it's a universal story about getting a diagnosis like this, just how our family ended up treating it and surviving a debilitating diagnosis that really changes, as you mentioned, our entire life.
When Maggie was diagnosed, that very day or the next day, you just up and quit your job and just devoted yourself to your family and her health.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't, it was a hard decision. It was, but it was necessary. I think that for me, spending the hours that I was spending in the office wasn't going to be worth it while I was watching my daughter lose her skills and lose her ability to use her hands. It just wasn't going to be worth it. And so I had the luxury of being able to just refocus on any freelance work and dictate what my own time schedule was, so that I could focus on her therapies and help her get through what ended up being the most difficult part of the Rett syndrome at the time.
And you are a filmmaker by career, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I'm a producer and director and a writer, and have been for 20 years. So when I left my my office production job for Sarah Silverman's digital studio, I was able to kind of continue to make things, and especially make things that might have a positive impact on our daughter's life. And that's, again, what we hope this documentary can do, is raise money and raise awareness about this disorder, so that we can welcome people into this cause and fight along with us. Because, as I said, the disease is curable. We just need to raise enough money in order to get it over the hump for the science to translate into humans, and we need help in order to do that.
The movie, the documentary Magnolia's Hope, which you can now stream, ends on a purely positive note, because you and your wife decided finally, okay, we're going to make Maggie's life each day an adventure and celebrate each day and each moment. And it turns out that Maggie's an adrenaline junkie. Talk about a brave girl.
Yeah, it's amazing to find out when your nonverbal daughter is more adventurous than you. But we knew at that moment that the only thing that we could do is make sure that she got to experience all the things that she wanted to experience. And that's why we did this thing during the pandemic as well, is just to expand the world that she lived in, because our worlds were closing in pretty dramatically, and even more dramatically than what would be typical for people. And so, yeah, it was just it was important for us to make sure that she got to experience all the things she wanted to experience.
I'm speaking with AJ Tesler. He is a filmmaker. He is a dad. His latest documentary is Magnolia's Hope, and it's really all about Maggie, his daughter, his firstborn, who has a rare neurological disorder, Rett syndrome. So tell me, how has it been dealing with the pandemic, having a high-risk child and a career that, the entertainment industry was completely paused with this?
Yeah. I think that we looked forward in June at what was coming in Los Angeles, where we were living at the time, and saw schools getting canceled, knew that Maggie wasn't going to be able to go back to school until there really was a vaccine or a reliable treatment, because the risk to her life was too significant. We saw all of the entertainment industry stop any kind of production. I knew that work was going to be hard to come by in the short term, and so we went out on this adventure and really tried to turn lemons into lemonade, as much as we kind of do in the movie too, where it's just trying to find the silver lining and make the silver lining where you can't find it. And so we just went out and made an experience out of it, and hope to be able to share some of those videos on magnoliashope.com or magnoliashopedoc.com in the coming months.
It's really interesting. It would seem to me that, having faced this crisis with Maggie when she was about 2 years old and having your whole life upended, you were probably a whole lot more prepared for the pandemic than the rest of us because you were unfortunately accustomed to having your life turned upside down.
I think in a lot of ways that's really true. I think my wife has been prepared for this type of thing for since Maggie was born, and not that she's really prepared for a pandemic. Of course, nobody can really get ready for that, but just we've thought about every possible scenario and how we can make sure that we keep our daughter safe because we've had to. Nobody else does that when you're in the special needs community. It has to be the parents preparing for any possible scenario. So, as dramatic as this whole thing has been for everybody, and as empathetic as we are for everybody going through it, I think that our experience has allowed us to act and to do things that found that would have been difficult for a lot of people.
I'm speaking with AJ Tesler. He is the dad of Maggie, a 10-year-old with Rett syndrome, and his documentary is Magnolia's Hope. But you also have a feature film.
Yeah.
Is it out yet? It's Mira Sorvino, Oscar winner, and she has been a guest before on Sonstein Sunday, and Sean Astin Mayfield's game. Tell us about that.
That was an incredible experience. I mean, it's a movie about a young video game prodigy who has to develop the world's best game in order to save his mom's company. And Mira was incredible. Sean was incredible. The whole cast is amazing. Marilyn Rice-Cubb is in it. Eric Griffin, Bobby Lee, Jim O'Hare, Creed Bratton, Monty Markham. Just an incredible cast that we were able to put together. And the kids too. It's 3 16-year-olds, Chris Carpenter, Indiana Massara, and Philip Solomon, and it was just an amazing experience. And then we were able to finish it during all of this pandemic because we were already in post. So it will be coming out in 2021. Blue Fox is handling distribution, and we should have announcements about that right at the turn of the new year. And I can't wait for people to see it. It's the opposite of this movie. It is a very lighthearted family comedy, and I think that people will really like it. I'm excited for people to see it.
Now, is it going to open in theaters and streaming, or just streaming? I mean, everything has changed, including the way the public now sees and expects to see movies.
Yeah. We don't know exactly where it's going to air just yet. I think that the hope is that by waiting a few months, that there's a chance that it does open in some theaters. But I don't think that we really know until we go through this entire process. And the movie-going experience is dramatically different now. I mean, I heard Alan Ball talk about it too on one of your previous episodes. Just the idea that our experiences have changed. We're used to watching premieres now on streaming devices. And there are new technologies so that you can do watch parties and watch with friends, all of these kinds of movies. So you can get a similar experience. I think that, I hope that the movie-going experience returns. I think that it will. I think that especially when all this is over, people are going to be desperate to go out and do something. And even just to be able to sit in a crowded room and feel safe about it is going to be foreign. It's going to take a while, but when it does, and when we are able to, it's going to feel wonderful.
But you have to wonder, one of the things that was floated was the idea of blockbusters being the ones that open in theaters and everything else pretty much available for streaming. And there was one company, I think it was Universal, that even made a deal already that if a movie makes 50 million the first weekend, then it doesn't stream as quickly as the lower earning films. I mean, actually putting a figure on it.
Yeah.
We're all feeling our way, but does that make you nervous? How do you feel about all that?
It's so hard. I mean, I think that the blockbusters have long driven all of the in-theater movie business anyways. So they're going to continue in 1,000 different ways. Going to see an Avengers movie is very different than going to see Three Bridges in Ebbing, Missouri. It's just, you're going for a vastly different experience. And the experience of watching Three Bridges and streaming is not that different than watching it in the theater. But the experience of watching the Avengers is very different than watching it in the theater. So, I think that we'll see a shift where the blockbusters will further dominate for a lot longer, especially because those are the ones that are able to go back into production. You're not getting a lot of these independent movies that can really jump into production right now because they don't have the money to cover all of the COVID compliance that the union requires and that's necessary in order to keep people safe. In a year and a half, when people at large are vaccinated and we can get back to more of a normal production schedule, you'll start to see these smaller movies pop up, but the risk is going to be big, so the budgets are going to be lower, which is going to mean that they're likely to be back on streaming before they end up getting in this. So we're kind of in this weird cycle where we have to feel our way through it before we really know what's on the other side. But ultimately, as a filmmaker, and specifically as a filmmaker for Magnolia's Hope, and the most important thing to me is that people watch it. And I don't really care where they watch it or how they watch it. Right now, you can watch it on magnoliashope.com. Tomorrow, you might be able to watch it on something else. But my hope is just that people watch it, because for me, there's no more important message than this movie and our daughter's story. And how by watching this movie, just by being a part of it, just by sitting down for an hour and watching this, you could be a part of changing her future and changing the future of 350,000 other people who are suffering from this rare disease. And I promise it's not that sad. We do our best to keep it uplifting. So I do hope people will watch or listen.
Well, thank you and congratulations. Magnolia's Hope. You can watch it streaming.
New York's classic rock, Q1043.